Hi guys, Allison here, the Introspective Wife. Thank you so much for joining me for another week's episode. This week we are talking about emotional maturity. We'll be talking about Mark Manson's idea on child, adolescence, and adult, and the differences between what categorize those three ideas. And kind of loop them into how they would fit into this emotional maturity conversation that we're going to have today. So this idea came about because, as some of you may or may not know, my husband is deployed right now. And this deployment, we do not get to chat very often. We get to email back and forth maybe once a day for just a very short amount of time. So it has been different, and I was really nervous about this deployment because of that, but so far it has been okay. It's obviously not ideal. I would love to be able to talk with him more and share with him more of what's going on in my life, but I wouldn't say it's bad, and it's actually been really good for me in helping me gain a little clarity and work on my emotional maturity, because I realized that I have grown very needy in the last few years. I think I have been needy emotionally with my mom since forever. So I rely on her a lot to help me work through scenarios when I'm frustrated or angry or upset, or even sometimes when I'm super excited, which those are the more fun conversations when you get to share exciting or happy information with people. But most of the time it's not those, right? Most of the time it's when we're not feeling our best. So I realized that I rely on my mom and my husband a lot in those situations, and it's not necessary, and I can't always do it now. So I have had to really grow a lot these last few months, but it's been really good for me. So I wanted to share and talk about this a little bit, because maybe some of you might feel this way, or maybe some of you might realize wow, I do that a lot too. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just think that as far as our relationships with people, sometimes that can get a little old, right? When you're just constantly the sounding board, taking it from the other person's perspective, that can feel a little overwhelming to think that every time someone calls, or, every other time they call, it's with an issue, right? But also, what do you do when you don't have that person that you usually kind of rely on to help you through those situations, and you got to figure it out yourself, right? So I'm going to talk about that today. And what really was kind of the first experience I had where I was, I need help and I have to figure this all out on my own. And I made it through. And this experience was definitely one that I realized that all of this was going on, and started paying attention to how many times in my life I feel like reaching out for the emotional support, I guess. So there's a time and a place for it, right? And I'm going to get into all of that in just a minute. So if you've been enjoying these episodes, please share with a friend. Please check out the link below and see all the social media, the website stuff. Like I said in last week's episode, I am in the process of rebranding a little bit, so everything's taking time. It's not going to be a huge different landscape and everything, but there are just some things, kind of my approach to things are a little bit differently. So lots of changes, but I hope you guys are enjoying them when they do come about. And yeah, so just check out the social media, the blog, share with a friend, all of that fun stuff. Comment, subscribe. Yeah. All right, guys. I guess cheers. Let's get to it. I realized I rely emotionally on my husband and my mom a lot. I think that when I got married and just the process of getting married, that person before was just my mom. So if I had, an issue and it would be, and this is where I'm talking about, like, it's stuff that either they can't fix for you because they're not there, or it's not, their problem. So you literally have to be the one to go through it. Because a lot of time it wasn't even just to like call and be like, what do I do? That's like a whole different conversation, right? Like, this thing is happening and I don't know what to do. Can you please help me? Like, okay, let's figure this out, right? No, I would sometimes even have it already figured out. I just needed to call and yell at somebody. So I would call and explain, like, it could be as simple as somebody cutting me off in traffic and that really pissed me off. So I'm going to call my mom, and I live in LA now and I'm pissed about that. And so this thing is probably a bigger, it's just somebody cutting me off, but it probably represents something bigger in my life because I don't want to live in LA right now, right? Or something like that. So I know I've been doing it to my mom for a really long time, and she's a great mom. So she sits there and listens and says, okay, and lets me get it off my chest, and we move on, My husband does very similar things. He doesn't, usually respond too much to it, but he just kind of lets me get it off my chest and, okay, like, I feel better. So, like, I think there's times when we're just maybe going through something that you do need to talk to somebody and you need to, like, hash it out, right? Like, there are those moments. I'm specifically talking about, and this is very much related to me, I'm just assuming I'm not alone in this one, where, like I said, it could be the smallest things. It could be, the fact that our commissary on base doesn't have a ton of groceries, okay? So instead of just letting that go, I might, which I'm not actually complaining about this, but I might call my mom up and, well, I actually have done okay. There's other aspects to this, okay? But this is a super basic version of it. I might call my mom up, and just because I don't have anyone else to complain to about it. And so I think, like, when we do stuff like that, it brings kind of a lot of negativity in our lives, and it also brings a lot of negativity to those people that we care about. Because I only do that to, like, two people. I do that to my mom and my husband. When I'm out with friends and stuff, we might talk about some similar things that are going in our lives, and we have conversations about stuff, but I don't like call up my friends every time I stub my toe scenario, okay? But I might call my mom and be like, you won't believe what just happened. I stubbed my toe, or I might call my husband and be like, you know what? The toilet backed up today. Well, I fixed it, but I just want to let you know that I had to deal with that. Like, that kind of stuff doesn't really serve anything other than me passing on my negativity, right? And so emotionally, though, that was something that I used as a way to get that frustration out. And what ended up happening is I realized when my husband left, I'm no longer able to, like, get in touch with him the same way. And now we live in Japan, so my mom is sleeping during a good majority of my day, right? So when stuff is happening, I can't just call her up because I'll wake her up. And now I can't get in touch with my husband. So one of the very first things that happened, and like I said, I was very nervous with him going on this deployment because he was gone for 2 months earlier in the year, and I was very needy emotionally. Like, it was really hard for me, and there was a lot of stuff going on. I was still adjusting to here and all of that, and I was working on a lot of things personally because I knew that I was a little off. So I had a lot in my mind that I was working through, but it really bothered me if I didn't get an opportunity to talk to my husband every day. And so I knew this deployment was coming up, and I was like, I need to really figure this out because I'm not going to be able to talk to him like I do. I might go days without hearing from him, which is what happened. I went like at least 2 weeks, I think, without hearing from him in the very beginning of his deployment. So that was really, really difficult. But I learned so much about myself and realizing that I don't have to be like this, and also realizing what I was doing. Like, I don't think I'd ever really fully understood the emotional neediness I had with him and my mom until this scenario happened. So what happened? I had this government funded flight because of COVID and living over here. And I know everything seems like it's open and everything's back to normal in America, but it is very much not across the rest of the across the rest of the world, and specifically Japan. Japan has some of the strictest COVID laws and regulations out there. So we were not able to just get on a plane and go back to America. And I did come at the very end of this, but they opened up this opportunity where you could get a government funded flight through the like chartered airlines that we take when we move out here and when we move back to the United States. So usually the only time you're allowed to go on these is if you're moving as a family member, or maybe if you're like an active duty military person, they might put you on this flight if you have, business in America. But yeah, most of the time, the only time you go on this flight is when you come out here and when you move back to America. So otherwise, getting back and forth to visit family or whatever is on your own dime, and you fly commercially. Because of COVID, there have been some families that hadn't been able to go home the entire time they've been out here. So they've been stuck in Japan for 3 years. So our military and some very nice people organized for the opportunity. If you'd been out here for a certain amount of time, you qualified to apply for this flight back to the States for free, and which is like amazing. So I decided to take advantage of it because I knew that it would be gone as soon as the borders started to open up in Japan, and that's a really expensive flight home, so why not take it, right? So I decided to book it for when my husband is leaving, okay? And he was supposed to leave a little bit before this. I guess it doesn't matter time frame wise, but I was just like, the reason why that matters is because I was just a little scatterbrained. He ended up leaving later, so he ended up leaving the week that I was leaving, and it was a lot. So anyways, he is gone, and it's the day before my flight. So I randomly find out that because it's through the military and we leave from a military base, okay? I find out that if I go to the military base, I can check in to my flight the day before. So I was really nervous about the COVID scenario because they had just decided that to come back to the United States, we did not have to get negative COVID tests to get on the plane. I did not believe them because of everything that's going on. I'm just like, I don't want to show up and not have this negative test because we have to be there at 3:30 in the morning. You have to be there so early, and trying to organize that and get a test, it wouldn't happen, right? So I went the day before just to make sure, I didn't need one, and I found out that you can check in. So this, again, is a military flight. I need orders with me. And I'm just thinking my husband's military orders that show that I live here. I did not get anything from him. He did not get anything that was a travel agenda, okay? It was basically an authorization from his command or from whoever that said, yes, she's allowed to get on this flight. Okay, did not know I needed to have that. Had a little itinerary. Nope, that didn't work. So I went there with my passport thinking that this is just a normal scenario and tried to check in. Nope, you need this orders or authorization. Okay, I think it's this itinerary. I go back home. I go back with the itinerary. Nope, that's not orders. Well, this is all I have, and my husband's deployed. I can't get a hold of them. What else do you want me to do? Well, you're going to have to figure it out. They're very blunt, and I was very tired and, again, very emotional from my husband having just left and all that. It took every single ounce of me not to start bawling in this airport, which I am not, I have cried in so many airports I can't even count anymore, so it's not unusual for me to do this, but I didn't want to. Okay, I'm trying to be a big girl. I'm married now, right? Maybe I should stop crying and being so emotional. So I held it together till I got to the car, and then I burst into tears. well, it's in the middle of the day now. I can't call my mom. And I'm also realizing, what's my mom going to do for me? Like, she, I have to problem solve this anyways. I'm wasting time if I call her just to cry, right? So I hold it together. I, try to email my husband knowing very well that he is not going to get the email probably. And I start reaching out to the wives in my unit. Long story short, I get what I need to get, okay? So that was all great. However, there was this one point which I think I did end up calling my mom. I can't remember if I woke her up or if she had still happened to be awake. I'm not sure. But I had done one of those stupid things. Like, I see this little notification on my watch, and it's basically like I accidentally put my phone on Do Not Disturb. So I'm waiting for this important phone call from my husband's command to talk to me about what I need. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm sitting there. It's like over an hour, which I knew they weren't going to get back to me right away. But like, I'm just like carrying my phone absolutely everywhere with me, like afraid to go to the bathroom in case they call. Like, I'm so stressed out, right? Because if I don't have this authorization, I'm not getting on the plane the next day. And I have all these other plane tickets and experiences booked with family and friends. Like, I have to get on that plane, right? So I'm just like, finally realized that I had put my phone on Do Not Disturb. And I'm just like, oh shit, what did I fucking do? So then that's when I called my mom and I cried for a little bit. Because I was like, this all happened and I'm trying to deal with it and be a grown up. And then I put my phone on this and I didn't even know how, like, I have no idea like how I did it. So that was really dumb. But, my mom talked to me. Luckily, while I was talking to my mom, they called. So it was all great and fine. And like I said, I got what I needed. I got on the plane and I had my wonderful trip home. But that was like, he had just left. This huge thing, of course, happens. And that was the first time that I was like, oh, okay, I need to work on this a little bit. I need to work on my emotional maturity a lot. So I wanted to talk to you about Mark Manson's theory as well, or idea of how we kind of grow up and mature. And it like triggered, like when I was thinking of this episode and like talking about emotional maturity and like finding that for myself, I started to think about this. And his example doesn't tie entirely into emotional maturity, but it kind of gets you thinking about like how we make decisions and like the reasons why we do things. So he talks about like how we like make our decisions and what provokes those things. So he talks about the child. The child like goes straight for pleasure. So his example is ice cream, okay? So if you're a child, you want ice cream, you just go and take the ice cream, right? Like, what's the big deal? It's good. I like ice cream. This is great. This is what I want, right? So a child just basically works off instinct for what's best for them and for what they want. So he talks about like basically through certain kind of parenting and all of that, you're able to teach your child that there's consequences. So your child starts to realize that I want ice cream, but the last time I took ice cream without mom's approval, that really made her upset. So I have to now ask mom to have ice cream. Otherwise, I like my mom. I like ice cream. I don't want to make my mom mad. So like we start to learn through how our parents discipline us about, yes, ice cream's good, but that doesn't mean we get to have it all the time. And there are rules and things of how you behave in a society and how you work. You don't just get to act off instinct all the time. It doesn't work that way, right? So then he talks about from learning those behaviors, you turn into the adolescent. The adolescent learns that there's something that they want, pleasure, but they have to have these principles first. So if, again, the kid, like the adolescent wants ice cream, but they know that they have to go through mom first and ask. If mom says no, then he talks about like some bargaining tactics and all of that. But they understand at least at this point that, okay, well, if mom said no, I can't have ice cream, then you weigh the pros and cons of, is it worth getting in trouble stealing the ice cream? Is it worth waiting until she says it's okay? Based off of other consequences that might come about, you start deciding all of that stuff in your head, right? Like, is it worth it going through this? And then as an adult just goes straight to principles. So you don't have the pleasure aspect involved at all. So again, the child is child to pleasure, adolescent is adolescent principles, then pleasure, and adult is just adult to principles. So what this means is that you act out of you don't act out of the instinct of you wanting this thing anymore. So it doesn't matter if you want ice cream, it's not a good time to have it, so you're not going to have it, sort of thing. So then that goes into your other decision-making skills. Like you do things as an adult, not because you want to or because it necessarily fulfills your life in any sort of way. You do it because it's good for you. You do it because somebody has to get it done, right? So he argues that a lot of people actually get stuck in the adolescent phase. He says that there's actually a lot of adults, adult age people who are actually adolescents. And I totally get where he's coming from on that. And I think until I got married, I felt very similar in that way, not realizing it. And this is where kind of the emotional maturity plays into part. I think that, there was a lot of my friendships, a lot of the relationships were kind of built off of what can you do for me? And not all of them were built like that. I don't think that that's necessarily my personality 100%. But I think when we're, especially on our own for the first time and we're trying to move out of that adolescent phase, it gets a little cloudy because there are things that you're trying to go for. And again, depending on what kind of experiences you have, like maybe if you're someone who got married really early out of high school, you kind of learned this early on. But there are couples that I see too that just because they're in a relationship or just because they have kids, there are still people that definitely put themselves first, right? And whatever their wants and instinct is, it comes first before anybody else, or they realize that I have to bargain to get what I want over here and I need to manipulate the situation so that it always ends with this is what I want and I'm going to figure out how to get it, So I definitely think that there was a part of me that was like that for a long time because I didn't have anybody else to worry about except myself. So going through my 20s, unless it was maybe my best friends or something, I might act out of the interest of them instead of myself. But I would say that there was a lot of that where I was growing and trying to figure that out. And again, relying so heavily on my mom emotionally in those scenarios, which I think is kind of very selfish. And, and she jokes because especially while I was in college, it was a very stressful time, and she would get a lot of crazy phone calls, and it was just me venting, And although that was really great of her to take the time and do that, I never really was fully learning how to emotionally handle things, and I would act, I would not act out necessarily to other people, but I would be acting out in some sort of way, my own little version of a temper tantrum, I guess. So, really, when I got married, I started having to think about this other person in a way that I haven't ever had to think of anybody before. It's I really care about my family and I care about my family's well-being and what they're doing and all of that. But, when you're the kid in this scenario, you never have to think necessarily about the big picture for your family, especially in your early 20s. So as I was getting married, I'm now in my later 20s, and there was definitely a shift that happened. I was, and I think kind of coming to this more emotional maturity, clarity of seeing that I've been struggling with this for a long time, is that I do have to think about somebody else, and I have to think about them in all sorts of ways and not just how it relates to me. So it's like, with our house and a lot of the things that go on in your home, just like your daily boring stuff, right? A lot of that ends up falling on me and I don't like it. And this was something that I really had to think about when I was working on myself and my place in our relationship, because I really resented my husband for the fact that I'm the one that always has to do everything. But I started to realize, like, it doesn't matter. It has to get done, right? Like, somebody has to do this stuff. I'm home to do it. I guess it's going to be me, If the situation was different, maybe that would be him, but it really doesn't matter because it just has to get done. So I started, really hasn't been until this last year that I really started realizing these things, because it did feel a lot about, like, why me? Why do I always have to deal with this? This isn't benefiting me. You're the one that gets, it was always kind of that. And so even though I wouldn't say I was necessarily in the adolescence group, but I was somewhere in between, and I would pick and choose when it was good for me and when it wasn't to be an adult. And it wasn't really until this year that I started, my decision making and my feelings towards things really started clicking more with that group, and my thought process on how, what's important and all of that didn't really start clicking until this year, and probably until I read his book and started really thinking about it. Because it just never dawned on me before, I guess. So I just wanted to bring this up because it's something, like I said, it wasn't until really this year that it started to click with me. And we've been married for 4.5 years. So I wouldn't say that I'm this selfish person by any means. I don't think that's my characteristic, but just the way we think about things and how we approach them can make a whole difference in the type of people that we are and how we handle our day-to-day stuff. So since he's been gone, and I've been having to, and I've realized how much emotionally I rely on my mom and him, I've definitely taken a step back in several scenarios when my instinct was to call and vent and complain about it. I've been like, this does not concern my mom. Even in the emails and stuff, my old self would probably be just sending emails all day, complaining about the shitty things going on. No, what is this going to do to him? This is just going to make him feel bad that he's not there to help. And the reality of it is I'm solving it, right? I'm figuring out I'm figuring out the issues. So, unless it's a big thing that I just want to fill him in on, hey, this happened. I killed a gecko the other night, and that was really sad. I did not mean to kill him. It's just a little guy. And I was looking for him. He ran away. I was trying to catch him under some Tupperware so I could take him outside. And I lifted, and they're tan color. They blend in with the walls and everything. And he was in my storage room, and he crawled under this fold-up table that we have. So I lifted it up, trying to find him. I couldn't see him. And when I set the table back down, he was pinned underneath it, and his little head and hands were sticking out. Oh my God, it was horrible, guys. It was so sad. I cried for a little bit afterwards. But in that scenario, that was not fun. And I don't handle that stuff well. I don't handle bugs and animals in the house well at all. And emotionally, I wanted to I did text my mom and I did email him and tell him, because even though it was really sad, it's also kind of funny too. So it's one of those things where it's just I cannot believe this happened, right? But I felt so horrible, guys. It was so sad. I couldn't believe it that I did it. It's my first gecko and I freaking killed it, and it was so sad. But anyways, so it's just stuff like that, right? It's okay, that one was okay to tell him because it was it was a thing, right? But the normal day-to-day stuff, I just don't need to bother him with it, and I don't need to bother my mom with it either, right? My mom has her own stuff going on. She doesn't need to hear about my stupid bullshit. So I just think, bringing this up to you guys, where do you guys stand? Where does your decision-making come from? Are they based off of, your wants and needs, or are they based off of the principles of like what needs to happen in your life. And I encourage you, if you think about this and if you want to look it up, Mark Manson has a blog and everything, so I'm sure he talks about this somewhere on his website if you don't buy the book. The book, by the way, is called Everything is Fucked, a book about hope by Mark Manson. It is linked on my link tree because I've talked about it before. So it's a really great book. He has 2 books. I highly recommend both of them. Just has a really cool perspective that really helped me get into the mind frame that I have today. He's really cool. So, but yeah, like, you know, where are your decision makings come from? And if you find yourself in that adolescent group, like, don't feel bad. Like, this isn't about shaming for feeling certain ways. It's just sometimes it takes us a little bit more time or circumstances to get to those thought processes, you know? Like, sometimes, like I said, I don't think it really hit me until I got married because I never really had to worry about anyone else except myself. So your level of responsibility in life is going to also affect how you look and perceive things. And so, and what you do, you know, like I am a single, you know, when I was in New York, I'm a single person living in New York City, which is a very cutthroat city. So you have to be out for yourself most of the time anyways, in a cutthroat, job environment, right? My career requires you to really stick your neck out for yourself. So I think there's certain aspects in our lives and everything that ask certain things of us, but there's different ways to go about it. And I think that like when you start to read this stuff and when you start to really think about like where do your decisions come from, what motivates you and all of that, like it kind of helps put in perspective where you're at. And, you know, again, with the emotional maturity aspect of that, I think that like when we make decisions based off of our principles and all of that, and when we can see that stuff clearly, we don't have to rely emotionally on all these people for these other things. We can rely on them emotionally when it's really important for us to, right? Like, of course my mom's there to be supportive. Of course my husband's there to be supportive. Of course your friends are there to be supportive, right? But when you take advantage of that support, you know, that's going to be hard for you to go to them when you actually need them, right? So for me, I just no longer wanted to bother people with these like small stuff. I want to be able to like call my mom and talk about important things. I want to go to my husband and talk about important stuff, right? And so, yeah, and I said here, I feel like I have some more work to do, but by owning my situation and better controlling my emotions, I'm much more of an adult now. So I think, yeah, like I think, as I always say, this is always a work in progress, right? But I feel like I've definitely moved into that adult category a lot more. And like I said, if you don't see yourself fully there, that's totally okay. You know, if whatever you have going on is working for you, that's fine. I just think that you will live a more enriching life when you are working off of, when you're deciding things and finding what motivates you is based off of like different principles in your life that are important versus like I'm going to do this because I want this and I'm going to manipulate the situation. You know, I think it's just a more honest way of living, and again, doesn't take advantage of people and doesn't take advantage of them emotionally and all of that. So, all right. Thank you guys for joining me for another week's episode. If you enjoy this, please share. Please check out my social media, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Yeah, we're just going to keep on going here. And hopefully you guys are still getting some really great stuff out of this. Again, that's Mark Manson's book, Everything is Fucked, a book about hope. I highly recommend reading that. And his other book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. That's the first one. So again, they are linked in the description. Yeah. All right. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. And cheers. I'll see you soon. Bye.